What if I told you that acne can actually begin without you noticing it? No pimple, no redness, no swelling, nothing you could think of treating. When looking in the mirror, everything might look completely normal. But underneath the surface, inside a single hair follicle, something might be changing. And once that change begins, the follicle we discussed about in our last episode might look completely different. But this is where it gets interesting. At first, almost everything still works. Sebums are still being produced, hair is still growing, skin cells are still being made. System hasn't stopped. What has actually gone wrong? Remember our train station? The last time we were here, everything moved. People arrived, people left, nobody got stuck, every platform kept moving. We are coming back to the same station, except this time, something has changed. One passenger doesn't leave. That's it. No alarm, no emergency. The station keeps running like everything is normal. But then another train comes in, and the previous passenger is still standing there. This is really where our acne story begins. Not with bacteria, not with inflammation, not with pimple. It begins with something that should have left, but decide to stay behind. When most people think about acne, they think about what they can actually see. A blackhead, a whitehead, a red bump, a full-on breakout. Those are the moments that actually get our attention. Before you start seeing something on the surface, the follicle had already been changing for a while. And here's the odd thing. The first change doesn't really look obvious at all. The sebaceous gland is still making sebum, hair is still growing, the follicle is still there, doing what it normally does. But inside, something is starting to change the way these cells behave. To understand why that matters, I want to show you something we only walked past quickly in the last episode. These cells lining the follicle actually have a name. They're called keratinocytes, and you've actually got a lot of them. They make up most of the lining of the follicle. Now, these cells don't just sit there. New ones are constantly forming. As they move upward through the follicle, they change in shape. Eventually, they are ready to leave, or as we usually say in skin biology, they shed. In a healthy skin, the shedding happens all the time, and you never notice any of it. The old cells let go, they clear out, and the cycle just keeps going. There's actually a name for that whole process. We call it keratinization. Remember that word because we are going to come back to it in a minute. So now we know what normally happens. New skin cells form, they move upward, they change, and eventually they leave the follicle. But in acne-prone skin, this process can begin to change. Some of those cells don't leave easily as they normally do. Instead, they stay behind inside the follicle. And remember our train station story. This is like a passenger who was supposed to leave, but didn't. Most cells continue to arrive, but some of the older cells are still there. And little by little, the follicle becomes congested. In acne, this is sometimes described as abnormal keratinization. But the main thing to understand is much simpler. It's not a blockage yet. It's just the beginning of a buildup. And that raises another question, which is, why did these cells start behaving differently at the first place? We don't need to unpack every possible reason just yet. We will get to that later. What I want you to understand now is that these cells don't necessarily change in isolation. There can be other things happening in and around the follicle that influence how they mature and shed. Some of those influences come from inside the body, some from outside, and we will explore this as we move through this series. So, when I say this is where our acne story begins, I am not saying nothing happened before this. What I'm saying is that This is the change we are following. Something may have pushed the system to this direction before our passenger ever stay behind. We will discuss more about this later. For now, let's stay inside the follicle and follow what happens next. Remember, the sebaceous gland hasn't disappeared. Sebum is still entering the follicle. And this is vital because whenever we talk about acne, oil tends to be blamed for almost everything. But sebum on its own isn't enough to cause acne. Remember, the follicle was already producing sebum before any of this started. We showed you that in episode 3. A healthy follicle makes sebum every day. And for most people, that's completely normal. So, if sebum alone caused acne, everybody with oily skin would have acne. And that's just not what we see out there. This is what confuses most people. We hear that acne is caused by excessive production of oil. So naturally, we just think oil is the problem. But remember what we saw in episode 3. Sebum was already there when the follicle was healthy. So now the sebum is entering the follicle where something else has already started the change. Those cells are not clearing the way they used to. Sebum is still coming in, and now those two things are happening in the same space at the same time. Sebum isn't the villain here because healthy follicle does produce sebum as well. It's part of normal skin biology, so the better question isn't just how oily is my skin. It's what else is happening inside the follicle at the same time. And the interesting part is that if you look at your skin right now, you wouldn't know that any of this is happening. There is no redness, no swelling, no whitehead, nothing on the surface telling you that something has changed. But underneath, those cells are starting to build up, and sebum is still entering the same space. So now you've got two things happening at the same time. Cells are not clearing the way they used to, and sebum is still coming in at the same time. And from the outside, everything looks normal. The station is still running. Trains are still coming and going. It's just getting a little more crowded each time. So, does a small build-up like this really matter? And it's a fair thing to wonder, because few cells hanging around a bit longer doesn't sound like much. Remember, we're talking about a very small space. The follicular canal isn't some big open area. It's a narrow space which is totally fine under normal conditions. Cells mature, they clear away, sebum moves through, and the system keeps working. But now, some of those cells are not clearing the way they used to. So they start taking up space as more cells accumulate. You can probably see where this is heading. You've got materials starting to build up in a space that was already small to begin with. Think about our train station again. A few people staying behind probably wouldn't matter on an empty platform. Trains are still arriving, people are still moving through. And now, each time that happens, there are already people there who should have left earlier. That's really why this small change matters. The follicle hasn't suddenly stopped working. It's just having to function under different conditions now. As that build-up continues, those conditions keep changing. The interesting part is there is still no pimple at this stage. And that's what makes this stage so interesting. If we come back to the same person we saw at the beginning of this episode and looked at their skin again, we will see exactly what we saw before. Nothing obvious. But now we know there's more to the story. We know that those cells are not clearing up the way they used to before. We know they are beginning to accumulate. And we know sebum is still entering the same follicle while all of this is happening. Compare this follicle with the one we started with. It hasn't suddenly become a pimple, but it's not the same follicle anymore. And that's really the point of this episode. Acne doesn't have to announce itself the moment the process begins. Some of the vital changes can be happening before you even notice any changes on the surface. At the beginning of this episode, the follicle looked healthy, and from the outside, it still does. But underneath the surface, we've watched something change. Cells that normally separate and clear are starting to accumulate. And that's why, if we want to understand acne, we cannot start with pimple. By the time something appears on the surface, there's already a story behind it. I am Moseka from Motanic Skin Clinic, and this is Rethinking Acne. Our station is still running, but the platform is getting crowded. So what happens when the crowd finally has nowhere left to go? If you enjoyed this video, please click the subscription button, like, comment, share. We see you in episode 5.